Ananya Verma and Raghav Mehta's quiet neighborhood held more secrets than anyone could imagine. One woman's hidden visits to her neighbor's underground bunker would ignite a chain of events that ended in murder, deception, and a shocking revelation no one saw coming. The neighborhood sat quietly on the outer edge of a fast-growing Indian city, a place where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Narrow streets ran between rows of similar houses, each painted in fading pastels and guarded by low boundary walls. People here trusted familiarity. Doors stayed unlocked during the day, and neighbors measured time by morning prayers, school bells, and evening walks. Suspicion rarely crossed anyone's mind. This was a colony built on routine. Every morning looked the same. Children left for school at the same hour. Vendors pushed carts down the lanes, calling softly. By nightfall, lights turned on one by one, and the streets emptied. What happened behind closed doors remained private, and no one asked questions as long as order was maintained. Ananya Verma lived in one of the middle houses, neither new nor old. She blended perfectly into the environment. She kept her home clean, dressed neatly, and followed the same daily pattern for years. Her presence raised no alarms. She greeted neighbors politely and avoided long conversations. To everyone watching, her life appeared calm and controlled. Yet small details often go unnoticed in places like this. People did not see when Ananya stopped joining evening walks. They ignored the days she stayed indoors with the curtains drawn. No one noticed how often she checked the back gate before sunset. In a colony where sameness was comforting, change hid easily. The houses stood close together, sharing walls and secrets. Behind one of those walls lay something unseen, something never discussed. While the surface world remained quiet and predictable, the ground beneath held a story waiting to break through. What began as an ordinary neighborhood would soon become the center of a crime no one believed could happen there. Ananya's marriage appeared steady to anyone looking from the outside, built on years of shared responsibility rather than emotion. Her husband left early every morning and returned late, often exhausted and silent. Their conversations became brief and practical, focused on household needs and daily schedules. Over time, the warmth that once filled the house faded, replaced by routine and distance. The house itself reflected this change. Meals were eaten alone more often than together. The television stayed on for background noise, filling gaps where voices used to be. Nights passed quietly, with long hours of wakefulness and restless thoughts. Loneliness did not arrive suddenly. It settled slowly, becoming part of the structure of her life. Ananya adjusted by keeping herself busy. She cleaned repeatedly, rearranged furniture, and followed strict schedules. Control became her comfort. Any disruption felt unsettling, and yet something inside her felt unfinished. The silence of the house pressed heavily, especially in the evenings when the outside world grew still. Her husband noticed little. His absence had become normal, and he trusted the stability of his home. There were no public arguments, no visible signs of trouble. To relatives and neighbors, their marriage seemed respectable and problem-free. Appearances protected them from questions. Inside, however, Ananya felt increasingly invisible. Days blended together, and emotions went unshared. The lack of attention created a quiet frustration that had no clear outlet. She began spending more time near the back of the house, drawn to the narrow space that bordered the neighbor's property. Without fully realizing it, she started seeking something beyond her walls, unaware that this search would lead her toward a path she could not escape. The man living next door had always been a subject of mild curiosity in the colony, though no one spoke openly about it. Raghav Mehta kept to himself and avoided community events, declining invitations with polite excuses. He rarely had visitors, and his lights stayed on late into the night. People noticed these things but chose not to dwell on them, assuming he was simply private by nature. Years earlier, construction noise had echoed from beneath his house. Drilling, hammering, and the constant movement of materials went on for months. When asked, Raghav claimed he was building a secure storage space for business records. After the work ended, the noise stopped completely. The house returned to silence, and the matter was forgotten. Raghav's routine was irregular. Some days he left early, other days he stayed indoors without being seen. Delivery vehicles came at odd hours, unloading heavy boxes that were quickly moved inside. Curtains remained drawn even during the day, and the gate was usually locked. Despite this, there were no complaints, no clear reason for concern. Ananya became aware of these details through simple observation. From her kitchen window, she could see the side of Raghav's house and the narrow space separating them. She noticed how he avoided eye contact and how carefully he watched his surroundings when entering or leaving. His presence felt controlled, measured, and deliberate. Over time, the secrecy surrounding him took on greater meaning. What others dismissed as privacy began to feel intentional. Beneath the quiet surface of the neighborhood, Raghav's house stood as a sealed world, guarding something unseen below ground. Ananya's attention lingered there, unaware that this curiosity would soon draw her into a hidden space where control and danger waited in silence. Ananya's first visit happened without planning, driven by impulse rather than reason. One evening, as the colony settled into its usual stillness, she stepped out through the back gate instead of locking it for the night. The narrow gap between the houses felt tighter than usual, but she moved through it carefully, aware of how close the walls stood. On the other side was a small rear entrance to the neighbor's property, hidden from the street and rarely used. The door was unlocked. That single detail changed everything. Inside, the air felt cooler, heavier, carrying a faint smell of concrete and metal. The house was dark, but a low light glowed near the floor, leading toward a stairway she had never seen before. Each step downward took her farther from the familiar world above. The bunker revealed itself slowly. Thick walls surrounded a narrow space reinforced with steel beams. Shelves lined the sides, stacked with supplies and tools. There were no windows, no sound from outside, only the quiet hum of ventilation. Time felt suspended, disconnected from day and night. Ananya stood there longer than she realized. The silence felt different from the silence of her home. It did not judge or demand anything. It simply existed. For the first time in months, her thoughts slowed. She returned home before midnight, unnoticed. The next day, the memory of the bunker stayed with her. It felt like a place removed from rules and expectations, a space no one else controlled. What began as a moment of curiosity turned into something stronger. By the end of the week, she found herself returning again, stepping down those stairs with growing familiarity, unaware that every descent was pulling her deeper into a secret that would soon close in around her. The visits stopped feeling unusual as they became part of Ananya's routine. She began timing them carefully, choosing hours when the colony was quiet and movement went unnoticed. Each trip followed the same pattern, precise and deliberate. She carried small items with her, things that would not be missed immediately, and returned before anyone could question her absence. Inside the bunker, the sense of separation from the surface grew stronger. The thick walls blocked out noise, creating an artificial calm. The shelves were gradually rearranged, and the space became more organized with each visit. What once felt foreign now felt controlled, almost familiar. The bunker no longer represented curiosity but stability. At home, signs of change appeared slowly. Food supplies ran low faster than usual. Shoes collected dust near the front door as she spent more time away from shared spaces. She erased call logs and cleared messages without hesitation. Every action became calculated, performed with quiet efficiency. Ananya's awareness sharpened. She memorized sounds outside, learned which houses turned their lights off first, and noticed when Raghav was away. His absence made the bunker feel safer, as if it belonged to no one. The underground space became her private world, untouched by expectation or judgment. With time, dependence replaced choice. She felt restless when she could not go. The surface world seemed louder and more demanding, while the bunker offered silence and control. She began staying longer, losing track of hours in the artificial light. What she did not realize was that routines create patterns, and patterns invite attention. The more predictable her movements became, the closer she moved toward a moment where timing would fail her. The bunker had given her escape, but it was also shaping the conditions for a mistake that would erase every exit she believed she had. That night began like all the others, calm and carefully planned. Ananya waited until the colony lights dimmed and the streets emptied before leaving her house. The air felt heavier than usual, but she ignored it. She moved quickly through the narrow passage and entered the neighbor's property without hesitation. Everything seemed normal as she descended into the bunker, unaware that small changes were already unfolding above ground. An hour later, the power failed. The lights flickered once and died, plunging the bunker into darkness. The ventilation system slowed, then stopped completely. In the sudden silence, the underground space felt smaller, closer. Ananya reached for her phone, using its weak light to find the stairs, but the metal door at the top refused to open. It had jammed, sealed tight by pressure from above. On the surface, the colony was struggling with the blackout. Streets filled briefly with movement before settling again. Raghav had already left his house earlier that evening, unaware of what was happening below. The backup generator meant to keep the bunker running failed to start, likely damaged by earlier neglect. As time passed, the air inside grew warm and thin. Supplies that once felt abundant now seemed limited. Panic set in slowly, feeding on isolation and uncertainty. Movements became hurried, uncoordinated. In the confined space, every action felt amplified. Hours later, when electricity finally returned to the area, the bunker lights flickered back on. What followed was not relief but realization. The night had pushed Ananya into a situation she could no longer control. The mistake was not entering the bunker, but believing it would always remain an escape. That belief collapsed in the darkness, leaving consequences that could not be undone. As the hours passed underground, the bunker transformed from a controlled space into a source of fear. The air felt heavier with every breath, and the artificial light cast harsh shadows along the concrete walls. Time lost meaning. Without sound from above, there was no way to tell how long she had been trapped. The silence pressed in, broken only by movement and hurried breathing. Panic led to poor decisions. Supplies were knocked over, and objects once carefully arranged lay scattered across the floor. The narrow space amplified every motion, making escape feel impossible. In desperation, Ananya searched for alternative exits, striking walls and examining seams in the metal structure. Nothing gave way. The bunker had been built to keep things out, and now it was keeping everything in. The stress reached a breaking point. The confined environment triggered a sudden struggle in the darkness. Limited space removed balance and control, turning simple movements into dangerous actions. In the chaos, injuries occurred, unnoticed at first. The bunker, once silent and stable, became the scene of irreversible events. When the struggle ended, the air was still. One body lay motionless beneath the harsh light. The space returned to silence, but it was no longer empty or neutral. It carried the weight of what had happened. As panic settled into clarity, realization followed. Survival now depended on control, not escape. The bunker was no longer a refuge but a place that demanded decisions with permanent consequences. What happened underground could not be undone or explained away. When the lights remained on and the door finally loosened, the truth of the situation became unavoidable. The bunker had claimed its role not as shelter, but as the setting of a crime that would define everything that followed. Days passed before anyone noticed that something was wrong. The colony returned to its routine after the blackout, assuming the disruption had ended without consequence. It was only when a strange odor began drifting from the neighbor's house that concern slowly grew. At first, people blamed drainage issues or spoiled food left behind during the power cut. No one imagined something far worse. The smell intensified, spreading through the narrow lanes. Complaints reached local authorities, who decided to inspect the locked house. The gate was forced open, revealing a place untouched since the night of the outage. Inside, everything appeared orderly on the surface, but the air felt heavy and unnatural. Officers followed the source downward, the bunker door resisted before finally giving way. Inside, the space looked disturbed. Shelves were overturned, supplies scattered, and signs of struggle were impossible to ignore. Hidden beneath stacked crates and plastic sheets lay Ananya's body. The confined environment had preserved the scene, trapping both evidence and truth underground. News spread quickly. Neighbors who had waved at Ananya daily struggled to connect her face with what had been found below the ground. Her absence from the colony had gone unnoticed, mistaken for a quiet routine or family visit. Investigators documented everything carefully. The sealed structure, the condition of the door, and the arrangement of the bunker suggested planning rather than accident. What initially appeared as a tragic incident began to shift into something darker. The discovery shocked the community not only because of the crime, but because it had happened beneath their feet. The quiet colony realized too late that silence does not mean safety, and familiarity can hide the most unsettling secrets just below the surface. As the investigation deepened, the initial assumptions began to unravel. Officers expanded their search beyond the house and bunker, looking for movement patterns around the night of the blackout. Nearby shops and intersections were checked for security footage. What appeared on one camera shifted the entire direction of the case. The footage showed Ananya leaving the neighbor's property early in the morning, hours after the power had returned. She moved carefully, scanning the street before stepping out. There were no signs of distress or injury. She was alone. This single detail contradicted the idea that she had been trapped underground until her death. Phone records provided further clarity. Calls had been made from her device shortly before sunrise, arranging transportation. Data also showed deliberate deletion of messages and location history. These actions suggested awareness and planning, not panic. Inside the bunker, forensic findings supported the growing suspicion. The metal door showed marks consistent with being sealed from the outside. The position of the body and the state of the supplies indicated the struggle had ended before the final lock was applied. The focus shifted entirely. Ananya was no longer viewed only as a victim of circumstance. Evidence suggested she had survived the night, left the scene, and returned later. Why she returned became the central question. Investigators concluded that the bunker was used to hide the outcome of an underground conflict. What had seemed like an accident was now seen as a calculated attempt to control the narrative. The truth was unsettling. Ananya's choices after the incident led her back to the same place she tried to escape, sealing her fate and turning the bunker into both a hiding place and a grave. The final truth of the case left the colony stunned. Ananya's story was no longer about being trapped by circumstance but about the consequences of her own actions. Investigators pieced together a sequence of decisions that had spiraled beyond control. Each choice she made, returning to the bunker, manipulating records, moving unseen, had brought her closer to an outcome she could never reverse. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the image they had of her with what had been discovered. The polite, quiet woman who had lived among them for years had been hiding a secret world beneath the surface, one that none of them could have imagined. The house, once a symbol of routine and safety, had been the gateway to a place of danger and inevitability. As authorities examined the scene, it became clear that the underground space had become the stage for the final act. The conflict, panic, and decisions made in those confined walls had created a chain reaction impossible to stop. The bunker had been both a refuge and a trap, shelter and weapon. Outside, life in the colony slowly returned to normal, but the quiet streets no longer felt the same. Every neighbor who had watched from windows or walked past the houses began to notice the small details they had ignored before: the locked gates, the absence of footsteps, the faint smell that lingered too long. Silence no longer felt safe, routine no longer guaranteed security. Ananya's story became a cautionary tale whispered among residents, a reminder that actions hidden from view can carry consequences too heavy to escape. The ground beneath the colony, once unnoticed, now held a secret that would never disappear. The ordinary streets and calm houses masked the extraordinary tragedy beneath, proving that sometimes the most ordinary places conceal the darkest outcomes.